demise of the revolution. The truth of October 19th and the events leading up to it can never be told unless the principal actors make their confessions for the absolution of history. No better summation of the experience of the Grenada Revolution in its totality can be found than Charles Dickens' description of the French Revolution in The Tale of Two Cities. And I quote, "It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair." There is something to be noted in the experience of South Africa at the end of the apartheid regime when Mandela established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to exorcise the accumulation of hatred, anger, and bitterness that for too long imprisoned the psyche of the nation. There were many then for whom change was simply exchange and not meant to be an acknowledgement of wrongs committed, followed by the turning of a new page in history. One of the most profound reflections on the demise of the March 13th Revolution is a book by David Scott called Omens of Adversity: Tragedy, Time, Memory, Justice. Scott explores the ways in which people sense time in the aftermath of political catastrophe as a disjointed reality. And I quote, "The present no longer stands as an expectant moment between a past that must be overcome and a future that promises a resolution." In this context, the aftermaths of tragedy stick to the present, leaving us mired in immobility and pain and ruin, unable to move forward. I was privileged to attend the 50th independence celebrations
Somebody one driving it. They miss my thing thinking I'm driving.
Who?
I said they miss the thing thinking I'm driving.
Who?
Whoever control this lifestyle.
From home?
Don't know who where they.
Sandra, you are unmuted.
Okay, thank you.
Is that his run?
present, a space in which differences can be clearly delineated, but always subordinated to national interests. The unveiling of the commemorative Eastern Caribbean $50 note was another important first step in reconciling our past. I never would have thought that in my lifetime, the reconciliation of Eric Gairy and Maurice Bishop as accepted figures, as national icons, would have been possible. There's a favorite quotation of Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves from Karl Marx's 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, written in 1852, that sheds light on this historical juxtaposition. And I quote, "Men make their own history, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past.
was not an opportunity that was
In the reconciliation of the past, Gary's political contribution to the advancement of the Black disenfranchised working class was subordinated by the plantocracy under colonial yoke must be given its due recognition. Unfortunately, it is not widely recognized in the political narrative that Eric Gary, while working in the oil industry in 1943 in Aruba, taught evening school for workers under the auspices of the Aruba branch of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. This was the commencement of his positioning as a champion of the working class. On his return to Grenada, his mobilization of the exploited working class was rapid, and his ascendancy to leadership with the formation of the Grenada Manual and Mental Workers Union was meteoric. So intense were the labor struggles in this period that looting and arson were expressions of the felt oppression of the Grenadian masses. A natural progression from trade union agitation was the attainment of political office to move the struggle from the arena of workers' rights to political rights and the challenge to colonial rule. He became chief minister in 1961, premier in 1967, and first prime minister in 1973. An objective examination of the history of Grenada or any other country reveals that at every point in history, the ascendant leadership is the product of the prevailing material and subjective conditions of their society. Remember Marx, leaders make their history, but not as they please. They do so within the conditions set by the historical moment that has been shaped by the past. This is the lens through which we can contextualize every leader who has emerged on the Grenadian political landscape. And it is most applicable when these leaders stand out, for better or for the worse, in the queue of history. And although the chroniclers of history may take some time before a proper accounting and reconciliation.
Sorry. Good evening. Hello.
One becomes a leader without the coalescing of leadership, situation, and mass support. And this is the principle that helps us to reconcile the past in the present moment so that its lessons can inform and create a different and better future. This is what defines the entrance and the exits of leaders. It explains in the long march of history, the era of the Eric Gearys, the Maurice Bishops, the Keith Mitchells, and it will also be the judgment of the spectacular rise of the Dickon Mitchells. Learning from the past is what makes the present that expectant moment that prepares us for the future. And besides our own personal and national experiences, there's a wide compendium of human historical experience, as well as projections of the imagination to draw on. The essential lessons, for example, of George Orwell's novel Animal Farm, written in 1945, are worth noting because they speak to universal tendencies in politics, whatever the ideological slant. The tendency for leaders intoxicated by power to contradict the very ideals that they originally championed. That rhetoric can deteriorate into slogans empty of all meaning or contradictory to their original meaning. Both the 1951 social revolution and the 1979 anti-imperialist revolution at a simple level carry similar lessons. The reconciliation of history, especially with respect to these two revolutions within relatively successive chronological periods, is a process that requires deep analytical depth, dispassionate analysis, and intensive research. Placing these in historical juxtaposition, I sincerely believe, will enable the excavation of the lessons of our history that can provide pathways as well as one of pitfalls to shape the present and to guide the future. I cannot in this address undertake this comparative analysis because of the extensive and dispassionate research required, and one which is best undertaken by a solid team of political scientists and historians. Allow me, however, to spark this process by proposing some conceptual comparative criteria as a basis for this reconciliation. 1. Causes and motivations. Analyzing the underlying causes and motivations leading to each revolution. This would include economic conditions, social inequalities, political repression, cultural shifts, and the role of ideology. Understanding what drives revolutions helps in comparing the grievances and aspirations of the people involved. Secondly, leadership and organization. Examining the leadership structures and the organizational strategies of the revolutionary movements. This involves looking at the role of key figures, the structure of revolutionary groups, and the strategies they employ to mobilize support and challenge the existing order. Thirdly, international influence and context. Accounting for the international context and external influences on each revolution. The geopolitical context of the social revolution of 1951 and the revolution of March 13th were remarkably different in the space available to each movement. March 13th, although immediately local in its focus, immediately assumed huge strategic implications for the Black struggle in the United States and elsewhere. As Morris revealed in his famous 1983 speech delivered in the US to a massive audience at Hunter College, the fact that Grenada was English speaking with a 95% Black population made Grenada, in the view of the US, a dangerous inspiration to Afro-Americans. This includes the impact of foreign governments, international organizations, diasporas, and global political trends. The role of international solidarity, as well as opposition, diasporic opposition, can significantly affect the course and outcome of a revolution. Fourthly, methods and tactics. Undertaking a comparison of the methods and tactics used in each revolution, ranging from peaceful protests and civil disobedience to arson, sky red, and armed insurrection. Understanding how the choice of tactics reflected the nature of the regime being challenged, as well as the philosophical and ethical positions of the revolutionary movement at the time. Fifthly, there's the issue of state response, analyzing how the existing state apparatus responded to the revolutionary movement in each era. This includes the use of repression, negotiation, reform, or concession, and how such responses influence the course and outcome of the revolution. Sixthly, impact and outcomes, evaluating the immediate and the long-term impacts and outcomes of each revolution. This involves considering changes in political structures, social relations, economic policies, and cultural norms. The success and failures of a revolution can be measured by its ability to achieve its stated goal and the extent to which it transforms society. Seven is the issue of public support and participation, investigating the level of political support and the breadth of participation in each revolution. That would require looking at social classes, ethnic groups, and genders which were most active in the movement, and how this support influenced the revolution's strategies and objectives. Eighth, and lastly, legacy and memory. Examine the legacy and memory of each revolution, including how it is commemorated, celebrated, or condemned in the country's historical narrative, in its education system, and cultural expressions. How the legacy of these revolutions has shaped Grenadian national identity and influenced subsequent and future political movements is the central question. The revolution of March 13th lasted 55 months, or 1,681 days. But the impact of that process was wider and deeper than any other post-independence political process in the Anglophone Caribbean. One of the most striking features of that process was the level of public support and the breadth of public participation. Indeed, had the New Jewel movement not been able to galvanize broad public support, March 13, 1979 would easily have been a failed insurrection rather than a popular revolution. Throughout the lifespan of the revolution, this broad public participation was institutionalized as a central legitimating principle of the revolution in almost every initiative undertaken by the revolutionary government. In education, the CPE literacy campaign, with volunteer teachers of all ages, teaching learners of all ages. In community cleanups, construction of community facilities, repair of roads and other infrastructure. In parish, zonal, and sectoral councils, in which public policy such as the national budget was discussed and input solicited from the people. In my view, the most basic contradiction of the revolution was the disconnect between these mechanisms of popular participation and the highly centralized Leninist mode of operation of the party. And it can be argued that this contradiction was central to the destruction of the revolution. The program of the revolution was firmly politically progressive, yet economically practical and pragmatic. And the catalogue of its accomplishments speak for themselves in social development, empowerment of women, improvement of the living standards of the general population, but especially the marginalized, the growth of the economy, the improvement of infrastructure, with the construction of the international airport as its biggest accomplishment. What made the revolution stand out in the region was its unapologetically independent foreign policy. At the height of the Cold War, any posture that was non-aligned to US interests was considered unacceptable by Washington. And that set the stage for the war of words, which ultimately led, at the moment of its own suicide, to the US invasion. This action by the United States in 1983 was, up to that time, the largest US military operation since Vietnam. Reports of the actual numbers involved varied widely, from 1,900 troops to, quote, more than 6,000 American Marines and soldiers who actually landed, or the additional 9,000 or so on the warships or in Barbados, supported by 11 US warships who struck at dawn, strategically targeting the island's 2 airports and knocking the government radio station off the air. But more significantly than the actual scale of the physical operation were the geopolitical optics used by the Reagan administration to justify its actions against Grenada. It is a matter of indisputable historical record that the scenario that was to be used as a justification for the invasion had been previously the script for US military exercises off Vieques, Puerto Rico in 1981, titled Operation Amber and the Amberines, a scenario which American troops captured the island of Amber, install a government friendly to America, and keep US troops there until the elections were over. Professor Wendell Bell of Yale University argued in an article, The American Invasion of Grenada, a note on false prophecy, that, and I quote, the Reagan administration gave 3 main reasons for the invasion. They claimed that Americans on Grenada, particularly the St. George's University Medical School, would be harmed from continuous social disruption on Grenada. That the militarization of Grenada was intended as a means for the future export of terrorism or revolution to its Caribbean neighbors. And thirdly, that the planned international airport at Point Salines was intended to be a future Soviet-Cuban military base. Each was false, end of quote. Reflecting on the reconciliation of history and aftermath of the revolution's suicide, an important element of that process must involve placing the People's Revolutionary Army in perspective. It is necessary to make a distinction between the uniformed officers who actively engage in the shooting of unarmed civilians and those members of the armed forces whose resistance to the US invasion was an act of duty for those schooled in the sanctity of national sovereignty. To get it, no patriotic American military would stand by and observe the invasion of the US without offering resistance, regardless of their opinion of their government. Equally, there were many patriotic Grenadian youth who stood their national ground as they were taught to, and they deserve no less recognition and compassion. The recognition of those Grenadians who paid the ultimate price in defense of their homeland, and the care of those injured and incapacitated as a result, is part of the reconciliation of history necessary in these times. But the greatest tragedy of the March 13th revolution is the national amnesia that has resulted from its self-destruction. Prime Minister Skerrit of Dominica lamented in a previous March 13th anniversary address that, and I quote, the greatest tragedy of that historical episode is that we have failed to learn the lessons of that experience. And even more disturbingly, succeeding generations seem to have no knowledge of what is, without question, the most significant historical episode in the Caribbean in the 20th century. End of quote. So reconciliation and moving forward. As indicated earlier, the efforts made in the celebration of Grenada at 50 represent, however one may choose to view it, at least a first step towards a reconciliation of history. This does not mean that the experience hurts will automatically dissipate, but it is a start that recognizes that history is invariably a long, painful road with zigs and zags, but a journey whose trajectory that is always determined by the road chosen, the high road or the low road. It is about the will that we must muster for this journey. Do we, as Gramsci urges us, maintain an optimism of the will despite whatever pessimism of the intellect may afflict us? The challenge and the opportunity of this present moment lie before us. And regardless of the choices that we make, the future is coming at us, whether we like it or not. And we can either seek to be the authors of our destiny or become the victims of forces beyond us. The world today is as volatile as it has ever been. But the era in which we live is one of rising consciousness, in which the oppressed and the dispossessed are seeing more clearly the historical continuities between the modes of exploitation of the past and their expression in the present. To its credit, the current administration has proposed a Vision Plan 75. Without vision, the nation would perish, but which, by their admission, has not come from thin air, but chose as its starting point that which preceded it. The challenge now is to build social cohesion and national will through the widest public consultation and engagement, so that this plan becomes a common aspiration of every Grenadian and creates the legacy of the future that we want. There is no better note to conclude this presentation than the admonition by the Right Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey about acting today to create the tomorrow we want. And I quote, "What you do today that is worthwhile inspires others to act at some future time. Chance has never satisfied the hope of a suffering people. Action, self-reliance, the vision of self and the future have been the only means by which the oppressed have seen and realized the light of their own freedom. Forward ever, backward never."
We are here over a radio station that read over provided by revolution.
What an amazing lecture by our special guest, Dr. Jules. Thank you so much for those words. Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, at this moment, we are going to get into a panel discussion. I'm going to invite a number of friends who are across the globe to participate in this process. They will join Dr. Jules, who would have to leave shortly because he has a previous engagement. First of all, I'd like to introduce the first panelist is Akima Paul Lambert. She's based in London. She's a practicing attorney out there in England. Akima Paul Lambert. I also want to introduce Brother Ken Lewis. Ken Lewis is an economist and one of the youth leaders in the Grenada Revolution. He is based between Grenada and New York. I think currently he is in New York. Brother Ken Lewis. I also want to introduce a young lady, Sister Jane Nurse. Sister Jane Nurse hails, she's an internationalist. She is a climate justice activist and a campaigner for sustainable development. Born in Germany, but currently based in Grenada. Sister Jane Nurse. And the last panelist I'd like to introduce is Comrade Ruggles Ferguson. Ruggles Ferguson, QC. He is the principal attorney at Siboney Chambers based in Grenada and one of the leaders of the Grenada Revolution Memorial Foundation, which is one of the co-sponsors of this event, Comrade Ruggles. All right, so these four panelists will come together and support Dr. Didacus Jules. As I said, he has to leave in a short while because he has a prior engagement. Sisters and brothers, those of you who are joining us and listening to this program, we are getting involved in a section called question and answer. So what we would invite you to do is to post your question either in a Zoom chat, on Facebook, and we will get these questions and we will pose these questions to our panelists, who we are well disposed to do justice to your concerns, to your questions, to your comments. So I have one of my brothers, one of my comrades, all the way in Germany. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning in Germany, but he is up and about assisting and supporting this process. Dr. Raymond Gallo-Nurse. Thank you again for supporting us, colleagues, and let's get the questions rolling. Dr. Nurse will have to help me with these questions. So let me make sure we have our first question coming in. So let me ask a question in the meantime to any of the panelists. We are at an important junction. Grenada at 50, the revolution at 45. And my question is, colleagues, where do we go from here? How do we see Grenada in the next 10, 20, 30 years? And this is dedicated, any of the panelists, Ken, Lewis, or Ruggles, who I know they are on right now. I haven't seen the other two panelists yet, but either Ken or even Dr. Jules can take a go at this question in the meantime, while I get some other questions coming my way.
Can't hear you.
Brother Ken, I'm not hearing you. I don't know if other people are hearing you, but
No.
you have to unmute. So perhaps Ruggles, you can start. And
okay. Yes. Comrade Brown, are you hearing me? Are you hearing me? Yeah, are you hearing me?
yes. Are
Yes.
you hearing me?
Okay. Yes, and just let me indicate there are some technical issues. I know with the other two panelists, we have been trying to coordinate behind the scenes to make sure that we have a seamless operation, but there are some technical issues, and hopefully they should be in soon. But first of all, let me commend Didicus for an excellent presentation, a well-researched presentation, well-delivered presentation. And Grenada at 50, the revolution at 45. What strikes there immediately is the amount of time that has passed since 1974 and 1979. And the fact is, when we speak of the achievements during the period 1979 to 83, and in so many different areas that most importantly touched and concerned the people. Because what is different about the period of the revolution and possibly the subsequent periods is the issue of involvement, people's involvement. People were at the center of the process in the mass organizations of women, of youth, of pioneers, and in the various communities through their zonal and parish councils. And that is why when people lament that you cannot in this period get that spirit of volunteerism, because everything now centers on money, what people can get. And the answer, the secret lies in the involvement of the people. And that is where issues, I mean, moving forward of constitutional reform, I think is very important. But I see Dr. Jules is on and I know he has to leave. So let me give way to him because I know he has a function that he has to attend to shortly. Thank you.
You're welcome, Brother Dr. Jules.
Contact.
Dr. Jules, I think you got to also unmute your mic.
Doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah, I'm not hearing it myself.
Yes, there are some technical issues
Difficulties.
here.
But maybe I can go. Me, in the
yes.
meantime, I know.
Thank you. Thank
First
you.
of all, so first of all, thank you so much for putting it together, for putting this session together. Thank you so much, Dr. Jules. I really enjoyed your presentation. And I think it's so important and so integral for young people to be learning and to be reflecting on the teachings of the Grenada Revolution. In terms of Grenada 50 and in terms of the revolution at 45, one of my favorite speeches is from Morris Bishop, "We are in nobody's backyard." And when I think of the tenacity and I think of the gumption and I think of the bravery of our early two comrades leaving London at a very young age and attempting to actually impose a new world order, I am so proud. And I think that must be the template from which we must leap as a nation in the next 20, 30 years as we move from Grenada 50 to Grenada 75. We must not be afraid to break new ground. We must always remember that we are in nobody's backyard and we must be trying to do things. People talk about the revolution, but we must be entering into a period of renaissance. And I really like what Ruggles said about participation of the people, because once we have people-centered policies, it's actually easier to move forward in healthcare, in education, in investment, in community participation, in the provision of services. So I actually think that one of the most crucial areas where we can actually move forward in terms of Grenada 50 is putting things on the plane of renaissance, retrofitting the lessons that we learned from the revolution into today's society, today's economy, and taking a brave stance, not being afraid to break new ground, not being able to, not tethered to the way that we have always done things before. Looking at things, for example, diaspora bonds. We've been talking about it for a long time. We haven't activated it. The lessons we learned from nationalizations, they can be used towards new form public-private partnerships in the areas of infrastructure. We look at education, where we had peer teaching around the revolution. We could do that in new and emerging areas, fintech, cryptocurrency. So all of the things that we learned, all of the lessons, they must be retrofitted as we move into a new era of the Grenada Renaissance. That's how I would like to put it.
together with this lecture is inviting some new, innovative, and creative ideas. And I love what Akima just said. Grenada we have to be bold, we have to be courageous, we have to be not afraid to take risk, all right? Break new ground. So I also want to invite other colleagues, other listeners out there. You can, if you don't have a question, but you want to make a comment, you want to make a contribution, you are welcome to do that also. So we invite in questions, comments, contribution. And again, if any of the panelists want to come back and make a contribution, Ken, is your mic okay? Could you tell us where you are? Dr. Jules, can you give us an update? Let us know that you are okay now. Yeah, Dr. Jules, I'm still not hearing you. Yeah, I'm still not hearing. Rogus, are you hearing Dr. Jules?
I'm not hearing him. I'm not too sure what's happening there. Yes.
Let me see if I can butt in at this point. Ruggles, could you hear me from Zoom?
And there are some questions. I'm not too sure, Bernard, whether you've seen them, the questions in the chat.
I have one here that was sent to me by another media, and I want to ask this question. The NGM from 1977 to the revolution was a vanguard party of mass direct action. That woke up to 1983. Why then, and this is for Dr. Jules, why then do you say in your presentation that there was a contradiction in the way the party operated and the fact that the revolution was made and there was tremendous amount of mass participation during the revolution, even if the party had a principle that we operated on called democratic, internal democracy, democratic centralism, where even ideas are discussed and debated, and then once a decision is taken, everybody march forward according to to implement that decision. Why is there a contradiction when the revolution introduced mass participation? The people got involved prior to, during. Why was that a contradiction? Yes, still having difficulty. Is anybody else? Okay, so well, maybe I could ask
what's happening there, because I know Jane Nurse has been trying to get on. Hopefully she is on. There's a problem with Dr. Jules' mic. But probably I can, yes. Because I saw another, and he may be able to come on. I think the technical people are working on it. But right. Chair, if I can probably address, I see the issue of the struggles of the indigenous people.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, was not mentioned. as part of Grenada's history of struggle. And I think that's an important observation, because one of the issues, I think we have to understand the Grenada Revolution within a particular context. And we have to understand independence within a particular context. And those eras don't start in 1974 and 1979. There is a history, there's a background that's very important to understand. And our background, slavery, first of all, slavery, that period of slavery followed by colonization. And in our case, we are colonized by the British since 1783, until we became ultimately an associated state in 1964, in 1967, sorry, together with several of the other countries in the OECS, and eventually regained full independence in 1974. Now, I make this point because under slavery, we are virtual things. The people brought in from Africa, they had no rights, zero rights. They were bought and sold just like any other commodity on the market. They had no say. Slavery, remember, was abolished in the 1830s. And then you had that period of colonialism. And under colonialism, there were battles between the British and the French over for Grenada. And then we were British colony from 1783 onwards, under the influence of the British. And again, during that period, other people determined our destiny. We had no, the first right to vote and popular vote came about in 1951, but our people didn't vote. So I think we don't discuss that sufficiently as far as understanding the impact that has had on the psyche of our people. And just leap forward to 1979, for example, and I was making the point recently with the Constitution, the suspension of the Constitution, and how the PRG has been beaten on this issue of the suspension of the Constitution and no elections. And the attempt to judge the PRG, its successes and failures, and its failures mainly measured against Westminster democracy. So, for example, the Westminster Constitution was suspended on March 12, 1979. And as the saying goes, there is no revolution in the world. And that's revolution is about change, about breaking with the past. And there's no revolution in the world where you don't have a suspension of the Constitution. And why? Because the manner in which you come to power is inconsistent with what the Constitution lays down. And the PRG made clear, it was made clear in many of the speeches of Prime Minister Bishop, that one, we do not believe, as he said time and time again, in 5-second democracy every 5 years, where the people's involvement was limited to going out to the polls and voting on election day. And between then and the next election, they have no meaningful role to play. And that is the context within which the people's democracy element has to be viewed. Not against Westminster democracy and the fact that there was no election. An election was promised at the beginning with all good intention. But when the PRG says, listen, we believe in mass participation, we believe in mass involvement, and therefore, in 1983, something that is not spoken about, the first constitutional commission was established in June 1983 under the leadership of Alan Alexander in Trinidad, senior counsel in Trinidad, and guys like Frank Solomon, to craft a new constitution for Grenada, which would come from the belly of bowels of the people. I see Dr. Jules on, and I know it is his moment, so I'm just really filling in. I hope his audio is repaired now.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Can you? Oh, good.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, to get your audio going, you know.
Thank you.
There was an earlier question posed about the contradiction between the extent of mass participation in the policies and programs of the revolution and the centralizing tendencies of the New Jewel movement as a party. As a candidate member, I'm not sure if I reached full membership status, but certainly candidate member of the party. I recognize that the party was a highly disciplined machinery and apparatus. And in fact, a lot of the achievements of the revolution had to do with that level of discipline. And it was amazing because, you know, we were all very young, but you could know a party member by seeing a young person walking around with a diary. Because I remember people coming into party meetings without anything to write on. And they will ask, are you coming with your hand and your mind swinging? Anyway, the point is, it was highly disciplined, but notwithstanding the principle of democratic centralism that applied within the party, there was a contradiction in the sense that at the level of the political bureau and the central committee, many things were kept within that circle and were not really subject to discussion or ventilated at the level of the rank and file of the party. And if you recall, when the crisis first broke with the accusation of Morris spreading this rumor, I attended the meeting at Butler House because I wanted to hear for myself what the accusation was. And Morris, being the kind of lawyer that he was, I felt no one could accuse him of anything to his face that he could not adequately defend and rebut. And he was present, the accusations were made to his face, and he was given a moment to speak. He spoke for about 2.5 hours, if your comrades recall. And he never for once in the course of that dialogue denied that he had ever asked the security guys to go tell certain people that the rumors about him being killed. And it is a mystery as to why would Morris do something like that, because I left that meeting convinced that he really did give those instructions. I mean, nobody could accuse somebody like Morris to his face. His whole speech focused on his history of sacrifice and his commitment to the party and to the people and so on. Now, there are some things, I'm actually writing my memoirs of the revolution, and I call it 1,681 days, memories of fire and so on. But there are some things that are almost inexplicable, and I'm not somebody prone to superstition and so on, but I recall in the early days of the revolution, because I was close to both Morris and Jackie, that Jackie told me, and Morris told me that story, that as a student in London, he and some friends went to a gypsy fair, and this gypsy person, reading his palm, told him that he's going to be a world famous leader, but he's going to die before he was 40 years old. And I was told by Jackie that at the time of the revolution that Morris took $1 million life insurance on his life. Now that was in 1979. I mean, $1 million life insurance was unheard of. What that says to me is that somewhere in his mind, he may have internalized this thing that, things that may happen, whether he thought, I doubt he thought that any of his comrades would have killed him. He probably felt, given the role of imperialism and the history of all liberation leaders and so on, that was a very likely thing. So he made his provisions. So it is possible that when, at some point, given what played out in the Central Committee, and again, only Central Committee members are in a position to explain to us what really happened. at some point he may have felt some justification that, you know, this was the time, because I think he was nearing 40 by the time this happened. So he may have felt that the worst fears were coming true, and therefore the issue was whether him asking, if he did ask the guys to spread that word, did he ask out of an attempt to self-defend in the anticipation or the fear of what would have happened? Knowing Morris, I don't think he would have spread this, asked for this rumor to be spread on a malicious basis. So, you know, that's why I said we can only move forward in history if those who know the real answers to this are prepared to speak the truth of what happened. And I know for sure that the militia I was a member of the militia in Morris's constituency, St. Paul's. And St. Paul's, hello?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. I was a member of the militia in St. Paul's, and I know the St. Paul's militia were absolutely loyal to Morris. So from the time this thing came out, it meant that the guys would go to defend their chief. And the rest is history. So that's what I'll say. Now, I think, if I recall correctly, I haven't read the book thoroughly, but even Bernard Court in one of his writings spoke to express the view that had the issues in the Central Committee been submitted to the same organs of popular participation that the PRG was using at a mass level, we would not have arrived at that stage of crisis. And I believe that that's very likely, because one for sure, I can tell you, the masses would have spoken unequivocally in favor of Morris Bishop, and that leadership issue would have been resolved right there and then.
But Dr. Jules, in fact, that was my next question from one of the audience, and that is, can we attribute one of the key reasons for the failure of the revolution in October of '83, the fact that we created the organs of mass democratic people's participation, the parish councils, the zonal councils, the mass organizations of the youth and women. And the question is the failure of the revolution due to the fact that the party itself, while we have created these organs of mass participation, for some reason, we fail to give enough trust to the same masses to help us resolve difficulties like that.
Absolutely, and everything I said in that speech was very deliberately said. So the areas I identified as being the 8 criteria for a proper analysis of this situation, I think really needs to be taken carefully into consideration, because there is a fundamental contradiction. These organs of popular democracy work exceedingly well. As a permanent secretary for education, I was summoned to many zonal meetings and parish meetings to explain the condition of schools in the country. And I can tell you the initial meetings were very rough, because it was the first time senior officials were being brought before a community to explain the situation of what's happening in education. And I get enough cussing for that in some of these meetings. People are like, what the hell are you all doing? Look at the state of the schools, no toilets, this, that, the other. And we had to take the blitz and say, okay, we accept that, we will do something about it. And over a period of about a year, there was a decisive shift from you appearing in these zonal meetings and people just cussing you, what you doing, to change the paradigm to saying, the toilets are a mess in our school, we are prepared to come and provide the labor. What is the ministry going to assist with? And remember, the Ministry of Infrastructure also set up a special unit for community work. And if the party members learn to use different types of equipment, I learned to drive a road grader, the type that you walk behind, like a kind of push tractor to grade the roads, because a lot of work was done on community road repair. And the process was that you would apply to the ministry for whatever material and engineer for whatever repairs you wanted to do. An engineer would come and assess it, on a Saturday morning, they would drop off the material. If it needed technical supervision, somebody from that unit would come and supervise the work. So this thing was working very, very well. And therefore, there was no reason. The national budget is another example. The budget was constructed, first of all, by the technocrats of the Ministry of Finance, doing an analysis of the budget, of the performance of the budget in the preceding year. That was taken. I was part of a committee, people like Noel Hodge, Chris Searle, myself. We would take that document and reformulate it in a more popular format, even using, drawings and comic strips and so on where possible. And then that would then be brought to zonal meetings so that people receive a report on the performance of the economy in the preceding year. And then you would have people breaking into working groups to brainstorm on what they would like to see going to the budget. And it was amazing. People were recommending sin taxes on tobacco and alcohol. They were indicating areas in which they felt that the government needed to put priority. All of that would be compiled. You had geographic meetings to do this. You had sectoral meetings, youth by themselves, elderly, the disabled, and women, and big farmers as well. So these sectors would also be, the private sector would have their own thing as well. And all of that will be compiled in a document, by a copy of which I still have from one of the years, compiled into a document that spoke to all of the recommendations received from throughout the country. The cabinet would have a retreat for at least a weekend. Going through those documents, there'll be the frequency of the occurrence of some recommendations, and out of that, the national budget would be shaped. And then, as you remember, at the Dome, Maurice would come and give an address on the direction of the country under the new budget, where Bernard would present the budget, and Maurice would speak. Usually his legendary speeches, 4 hours delivery on the new direction for the coming period. And we call too, in terms of accountability, when rumors started about CORD stealing money and so on, the next week, what appeared in every place where the government had a project, there were huge billboards. The asphalt plant in Granans, if it is housing, $2 million housing, this is where your tax money goes. Asphalt plant, however million, this is where your tax money goes. Every project had a huge billboard saying what was the cost of the project, this is where your tax money goes. So the visibility and the accountability for in the national budget was fully democratized.
So at
Now,
this point,
in terms of the future, I think these are the lessons. Obviously, the revolution was 1979, very different times, different geopolitics and all of that. I think there was a bipolar world in which, one could dance between the raindrops. However, in this current time, what is important are to take those initiatives of the revolution that are still relevant to today. Look at the agro-processing that was done. Grenada was perhaps even more in advance than some of the MNCs in CARICOM. Nutmeg jam jelly. I ate avocado ice cream for the first time in my life, done by a Grenadian entrepreneur who had come back from Germany and set up an ice cream factory on the Carenage. So all of these things need to be brought back, not as they were then, but modernized. The National Import Board, for example, was established for both cost savings for the masses as well as strategic purposes. All essential food items were only solely imported by the National Import Board. And the reason for that was to ensure that the government could stockpile the necessary foods in case of a blockade. That also, because of pool procurement of these things, they got them at the lowest possible price. The private sector who formally brought it in was still allowed to do the distribution with assigned markups. So we were not cut out of the process. And that's why I said too in the speech that the revolution was politically progressive, but economically very pragmatic. I mean, it's history now, it can be said. When Comrade Radix went and set up a restaurant in St. George's. He got a lot of links from the party because there was a document, a copy of which I still have today, that clearly laid out the role of different actors in the economy. There were things where the private stock reserved for private sector foreign investment with local participation, reserve areas reserved only for local investment and participation. There were areas that were reserved for state engagement only. So everything was delimited, and they were delimited with a very strategic perspective. The other thing too, from a perspective of education, at one point we actually set up a department in the Ministry of Education for school cooperatives, because to my shock I discovered that at the time, we're talking 1980-81, the schools in Grenada, the school system had something like $4 million BC dollars in credit union accounts held by students, because there was a student credit union movement. And this was amazing. So we felt, okay, let's just grow this thing, because it was getting Grenadians into the habit of financial inclusion, into the habit of savings, and how can we then use that for investment in the country, so that even students become part of a shareholder. So notwithstanding all the talk about Grenada being Marxist, Leninist and everything, well, politically, that was the ideology of the party. But in terms of the economy, it was very pragmatic and very inclusive in the approach to things.
Dr. Didikos, I really, really appreciate those comments. I think they are so timely. What I would do now, I would invite especially the young ones, Sister Kima and Jane Nurse, to comment on the question of how do you see us moving from where we are today, using the lessons of the past, including the areas of the mass democratic organizations where we had widespread people's participation. How can we put all of these together, and can Grenada benefit from these moving forward in the near future?
Your mic is off, Akimo.
I was saying I'd let Jane start because I had a bit of time to speak earlier.
That's very gracious. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Excellent, wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this panel today, for the excellent presentation, Dr. Didikos, and also for all the participants who've been so patient and bearing with us till this point in the evening. So let me address the question of, and maybe let me take a little roundabout philosophical approach to the idea of what the revolution means. And I'll bring some personal context into it, because for better and for worse, there's historical events in life. They might happen far away. We read about them, we see about them maybe on our screens today, would have read about them in the news, but they don't actually affect our lives. Then with the revolution in Grenada, as we see, it affected so many people, touched their lives, changed their lives forever. And in my case, I would literally not exist if it wasn't for the revolution. So with all the good and the bad, I'm a direct outcome of the revolution. And the first link would be through education, because my father was gifted a scholarship to go and study in East Germany. And so coming back to the idea of what the revolution means, and also linking it back to some of the amazing examples that we've heard that made the revolution so special. What is a revolutionary's task? What is it that motivated people in the first place to act, come together, and take the opportunity to create something for their own nation, for their own people? And I think some of the values that speak to me, and this is not a academic definition, we have heard some very in-depth research today, so I might not be able to measure up to that, but from my perspective, the values that guide a revolutionary are love, humility, and truth. And while there's a spectrum of these things, especially where truth is concerned, the importance of truth also goes back to seeking knowledge, finding education. And some of the lessons, if we're talking about what can we apply today from the revolution and what it brought forth, is, if you think of it, we're currently actually living in revolutionary times. Maybe we're not seeing a movement, a revolution that's toppling a government and radically or violently even changing a political system. But me coming from an environmental background, we're living through a revolutionary time where actually the ecological system is going through radical change. And so very often, from a small island perspective, we are seen as vulnerable. We are seen as the ones who don't have the resources to respond. And I would preface that actually, as small islands, we have a much stronger resilience than we think that we are. I think COVID actually was an example of that. And why do I say that? And that comes back to the heart of the idea of people. Now, when we live in the small island like Grenada, what are the assets that we have? We already spoke to agro-processing, for instance. Look around us, we have an incredible natural heritage, which actually powers so many aspects of our economy, whether it is sustainable tourism, whether it is agriculture. And very often, we don't actually give ourselves enough credit for the opportunities that does exist here. So translating it, and it's also International Women's Month, so I just want to, by the side, give a big shout out to all the women, working women, mothers, and so forth. But coming back to why do we need to really pay attention to the natural resource that we have given right now? Sorry, can you still hear me? I have a feeling I got maybe kicked out here.
We can hear you.
Yes, okay. Sorry, my headphones, they go eerily mute, so I'm just double checking because I know we had a few issues. So coming back to the natural assets that Grenada has, and I think actually the government vision, the 50-50 vision that now came out, kind of touches on that as well. Too often, when we see our natural environment, we just think, we take it either for granted or we bulldoze over it or we pour concrete over it. Now, with sustainable development, with tourism, where I've also worked, and there's a huge potential, not just to attract monies to our economy. Actually, it's another vehicle for us to learn and grow by the influx of talent that we bring in, but also by the talent that we foster at home. When we come to agriculture, so often we still have this love-hate relationship with agriculture. We recognize that it's the backbone of our society. It's what helps us subsist in periods of crisis, but we do not harness enough the power of adding value to the product and the quality that we can produce at home. We don't need to produce en masse. We can be niche and quality. And now, where maybe in the past we had volunteerism and communal strength, we're not just an island unto ourselves any longer. Technology actually allows us to be a global player. And so often, I'm so proud of Grenadians when I go as a global Grenadian and travel abroad, because we always punch above our weight. So we need to have more confidence in our skills, more confidence in what we can produce at home, and bring in local, homegrown talent, global Grenadians, but also investors that share our values to invest in small businesses in the island itself. So that's a couple points I just want to throw out there. Akima, I think I'll hand it over to you, just so you can also say a little bit more, but thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I hope we can have a few more back and forth before the time is up.
I really, really enjoyed that, Jane. And I really, really enjoy what you said about the philosophical approach. And I think it's important to start with that. A lot of people say the revolution failed, but I think the revolution failed if you see it as an event. Is the revolution an event, or is it a philosophy? Is it a way of thinking about things? Is it a belief system? And it's also poignant for me because I was actually born after the revolution. And I grew up seeing scrawls in my house on pieces of paper, Revo Tempo, Free Grenada. And it really sparked something within me, which made me realize that it's not about an event. It's actually about a philosophy. Are we revolutionary in the way that we are thinking about things? Are we transposing the lessons that we learned into our day-to-day lives? And that actually led me to celebrate March 13th, including in the UK, on a number of occasions with different speakers. And this was just something independently because I was so personally inspired by that spirit. So to me, the revolution, Rebel 45, needs to be transposed into the spirit of Grenada 50. And I touched on this a little bit, and I was really heartened by what Dr. Didacus Jules explained. And I think some of the very same things that he has explained in terms of community involvement, there's no reason why we could not be using that more effectively in the 21st century, where we have mechanisms like Zoom, Teams, electronic ways of communicating. So yes, we can go out into the schools and we can have a round table and we can have our zonal meetings, but we can also bring it into the 21st century where we can engage, for example, with the diaspora, with young people, with their schools, with Teams meetings, with, a whole host of virtual engagements as well. So I think all of these lessons, I'm using that as an example. And again, on the agro-processing front, there's just so much that we can do to bring not just our core agriculture products, but looking at things like spa treatments, the oils, the beauty care industry, the pharmaceuticals. We look at healthcare and all of the achievements that were made in terms of, bringing expertise from Cuba. There's no reason why we couldn't apply it to our own diaspora. One of the ideas that I had was something called Send Skills Home, where we traditionally send barrels, but who is sending the skills to
Akima,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt, but I must leave because we're having the opening ceremony of the first Council of Ministers of Youth and Sports of the OECS, and they're waiting on me to start. So thanks very much and for the interruption.
You're welcome.
Dr. Jules, let me just quickly interrupt also and say thank you so much for having graced us this evening with your presence and for an extremely enlightening presentation. I hope that presentation can be shared in the form that you give it early on so that other people who are not able to participate.
You have the speech itself, and I will send to others the text of it. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. And you have a
thank you
great
very
evening.
much.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. Akima, you make one. Akima, you have gone mute. Okay.
I really appreciated what Dr. Jules said, because I think we could break things down into their constituent elements and apply a new lens in terms of bringing it into the 21st century. So I mentioned, using technology more to do, mass engagements and outreach. We can use, in the area of healthcare, which the revolution did so well. We can expand that to the diasporas, where the diaspora can actually provide some of the services and fill in some of the gaps that we so badly need. Women, I'm really glad that Jane mentioned that, because I think that was a definite asset and a definite strength of the revolution, the way in which women were actually brought along. And now we need to move to the next phase. We're seeing so many women coming in at university level, so many women who are in leadership roles at the junior level. But where are women at the top? Where are women at a senior level? Where are women in charge, on our boards, on our political organizations, in our churches, etc.? So I think we now need to harness all of those lessons that we learned and not treat the revolution as a failure. It's only a failure when we don't transpose those lessons into our new economy, our new vision, and into a new spirit. And probably the last area I wanted to touch on which I was talking about, was agro-processing. I think there's so much that we can do in this space as a small, organic based country. That's where we can really compete. We've seen it with our chocolate. We've seen so many micro industries go around chocolate, and there's no reason why we cannot replicate that, in the areas of beauty, in the areas of, so many different areas in Grenada that we can actually replicate, the energies that we put into agro-processing, we can actually process. We're seeing now that cacao, they call it cacao, we call it cocoa. There's a spike in prices, and we won't benefit from those prices if we just continue to ship those raw products straight from Grenada. So I think what needs to happen is a critical analysis of what have we learned, and not just. And as much as I value this discourse once a year, I think we need to make sure that, it's an ongoing dialogue where people in schools, those of us who are writing papers, those academics are actually taking all of the learnings from the revolution and actually making sure that we incorporate it into a Grenada 50 plan, incorporate it into a sustainable development plan so that we're not starting from scratch every single time. So that way the revolution becomes less of an event and more of a belief.
I like that segue, because in fact, one of the top leaders of the world, he wrote a book called Sometimes We Win, Sometimes We Learn. So I like the idea that the revolution did not fail unless we did nothing about learning anything about it. Akima, you just touched upon a very important matter, in fact, as a question that just came to me, and that is, how can young Grenadians be persuaded enough or more about the future of our country, taking account of the lessons from the revolution? I think you answered that question to a large extent in your last comments there, but if there is anything anyone can add, how can young Grenadians be persuaded? Because there's a tendency that young people like to party, they like to drink, they like to, whatever. But how can we persuade them enough to take the lessons of the past and put that into a program where they can get more involved in national development?
Can I jump in there as a two teachers?
Yeah, and Ruth, maybe Jane, start. Sorry. Yeah, sure.
I'm burning for that question.
Please go.
I also want to use the opportunity to jump off something Akima mentioned there in terms of women excelling and succeeding. And that's something that's very close to my heart. And maybe it's an unpopular opinion I'm going to share here. Obviously, as a woman and as somebody who has benefited from lots of strong mentors, both men and women, I commend and I push and support other women to excel. Now, as I say that though, as much as we make sure that women excel and we need to see more success still, women breaking through the glass ceiling, we must not leave our boys behind. They must be developed with as much care and attention and positive discipline and productiveness as essentially every child in our society, regardless of gender. And the reason I emphasize that is because in our fairly, let's say, traditional male paradigm, which is much more competitive, as women rise and exceed, and men not pulling their own weight, or young men, it actually creates an imbalance that can be very destructive to our social cohesion. And so if we go back into schools, it shouldn't start at secondary school. It really needs to start in the first 3 years of life, which are the foundational life years. We need to give as much educational boost. And when I say education, it's not just being book smart. It really means searching for every person's talent and supporting them in finding their talent. Because then they can find what they love, they can be passionate about it, and they can start feeling empowered to do something about it. And if we're just pressing kids through the old pipeline of an outdated school system, if we're not paying teachers what they require, if we're not requiring teachers to keep learning and being proactive themselves, we're not going to have a bedrock of engaged youth. So if they want to party, and I'm sure the revolution had a lot of good parties going on as well. I feel like I've heard a lot of stories from the older generation about their wild parties back then. So I don't think that this is mutually exclusive with being also an engaged young citizen. But it has to come with an acknowledgement that youth has a lot of energy and passion, but it has to be directed and channeled. And there needs to be mentors and role models and people who will take you from the brink of sometimes also destructive behavior. And that's not just through punishment, it's through positive discipline, it's through opening up options, whether it's the sports, whether it's creatives, whether it is music, whether it is skills-based, talking again about can we foster agriculture and not see it as this thing that we've done in the past because we were slaves, but actually seeing it as something we're connecting with, something that is vitally or critically vital for our survival overall. And having a much more experiential learning framework that allows our youth to find their strength, to allow them to fail and make mistakes and learn, right? Because this is what Akim was saying as well. Let's not see the revolution as one event where we failed. Let's see it as an ongoing process. And as long as you keep learning the lessons, you can actually improve. And another thing that is required from that is to not just teach blind faith or I'm a patriot, for instance. Obviously, I love Grenada, but we have to be brave enough to look at the critical and difficult and painful wounds that we carry, whether historically or in our active lives. And that's something we need to teach youth as well, so they can be resilient. And so to close that off, I would really like to see, I think, a really strong focus on lifelong learning and education. And that education doesn't just become a status pursuit, but actually a pursuit that allows us to be more well-rounded human beings, that teaches us both expertise as well as emotional regulation and intelligence, as well as bringing us joy because it fosters our talents and skills. And if we can achieve that, a lot of the other factors, the other sectors in society, in our economy, we will be able to reach because people, young people, will be actually enabled to take advantage of the opportunities that these turbulent times, as they are, but also opportunities that come with that present.
Thank you. Akima, Ken, anyone of you want to take a go at this?
Can you hear me now? Oh
Loud and
my
clear,
God.
Ken.
This has been a nightmare. First of all, happy to be here, and I was listening to the panelists. You guys were wonderful. I just want to talk a little bit in terms of when Dr. Jules talked, he talked about the differences between the revolution and this period. And I think it's very different. And as Akima says, the revolution continues. We can't see the revolution as something that happened and finished. It was a mindset that gave us possibilities to do so much more. I just came from I was in the south of India at the end of the year. And one of the things that struck me was that they are trying to bypass some of the stages of development and going straight to level where they are using AI, they are using drip irrigation, they are using the latest technology to make it work. And so I think it's really important because today, because you have a very global world, productivity is key. Yes, there are niche markets and so on, but you have to be able to compete with the best because the markets now are global. So the world is a volatile and a violent place and dangerous place, but at the same time, there's a lot of opportunities. And we have to think differently. So for example, education, we have to educate, but we can't do education from 1983. It has to be a new type of education. And so I think there are some major opportunities, and I hope that the government can look at it. Being small is not always a negative, because sometimes when you are small, you can move faster. You can do target areas. So I think there's a lot we can do building on the revolution. And I know my comrade Ruggles Ferguson talked about the involvement of people. Overall, the difference between the revolution and every other government was the involvement of people. And so I think that is the critical thing that we have to focus on going forward. Hope I got
Colleagues,
what I really
thank
want
you
to
so much
say.
for that.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, colleagues. I want to bring your attention to a reality. The program is going to officially end by the television in a short moment, because this program is also broadcast on TV. But we will continue the discussion among ourselves on Zoom and online and so on. So I just want to pose one crucial question. I believe this one is an important question for the panelists. This is a question from one of the viewers. They are saying that the fundamental problem with the revolution was not keeping its promises. The Grenadian people were tired of Gary's attacks on the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to organize yourselves and so on, freedom to print newspapers. And this viewer is saying the PRG was even, the moment the PRG took office, well, not exactly the moment, but at some point during the PRG's reign, the PRG became harsh on some of these freedoms. The newspaper issue, we made some promises on the morning of the revolution. Morris said this revolution is for food, it's for housing, it's for education, the right to vote, and so on and so on. Some people are, this person is saying the revolution became harsh in some of these areas of freedom, and that will lead to the downfall of the revolution. Please comment.
Well, Bernard, if I can just address that question. And that's why I started off with context. Context. Because you can't compare the period of the revolution with the prior period, simply because there was an explosion. There was explosion of activity in which our people were deeply involved and were part and parcel of the developmental process. Now, in all processes, every single one in the world, and you can go back to the American Revolution,
Can anyone else hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you, but no rebels.
Okay, thank you.
Akima? Martin? Okay, I think we have been.
Yes,
I think we've been.
I'm hearing you, Felice.
Okay,
Yeah, I think
is it because of from the television side that
I'm
switching
wondering.
off?
I think it may well be.
Is we're okay. Because Roger seems to be frozen here. So let me.
Yeah, he's frozen.
Grubs,
Yeah,
Grubs, we don't hear you there, though.
Yeah, Roger is frozen.
Grubs,
Let me call him.
Grubs.
He's been frozen for quite a while.
Yeah. Anybody want to come to answer the question? Because I think that's a question that any one of persons that was involved could have answered that question, in the sense that in terms of the freedom of expression that the brother is referring to, and that may have caused the demise of the revolution.
Grubs.
Could you speak up a bit, please?
No, I was just saying that if someone else in the panel, someone who was directly involved in the revolution, could have continued where Rogers stopped from. Is there anybody there in the chat that could do that? One more thing into account, the revolution was pretty young, just 4 years, and the process of consolidation was paramount, and structures and laws have been put in place. I mean, the people's laws came in to ensure that the erosion continued uninterrupted by the elements of destructive forces that are counter-revolutionaries who may have tried to derail the process. So, of not fulfilling his promises, the revolution really fulfilled a lot of his promises that was promised, right? So to say that it did not fulfill, it was a continuation. It was going. It was working. I don't think the statement that it failed because of those things. The process of popular democracy was entrenched already, because you pointed out that was in place, and he spoke to it. The question of the international airport was a progressive thing. The MNIP, the National Insurance Scheme, the 14 enterprises altogether was set up. So there was progress, and the progressive movement, upward spiral of the Green Revolution was paramount. It was happening. Certainly, the revolution had failed because of that. I think because Jules in his speech make mention of power struggle, so may have caused that the implosion. But when one take a very forensic look at the revolution in itself, its entirety. Yes, they made mistakes, and lots of it, but the people's participation, the work that was done with youths, for example, education, healthcare. You could look at it, you can see it as a failure, right? You may have succeeded everything that they are attempted to do, but by and large, the disruptive minorities would have seen and asking for immediate elections, and some of the very persons who asking for that based on backing from a country, the United States in particular, who had their revolution, and it took them 13 years to call their election, right? And then asking for less than 4.5 years to call an election. So I think it's really unfair, in my view, to say that that's the reason why it failed. One has to take a wider view of the revolution and what the accomplishment was. As a matter of fact, I go back and look at the crime rate there. And look at there was more youth involvement in the revolution than there was in any previous government and after preceding government after that. So our youths was entrenched in the making and developing and building of the revolution. crime was done in our society, except for the counter-revolutionary activities that was geared to destroy and disrupt the process. But by and large, the revolution was succeeding. And it was not an event. It is a philosophy. It is really a blueprint too to build on. And I want to say that in all fairness, there is builders, architects of revolution that have not been given credit for the work, for the development of the revolution, namely Bernard Cold, have sidelined it in many cases and demonized. Right? And I recall reading Remove Tonight and his instrumental role in the actual revolution of March 14, 1979. If you read Big Sky, Little Bullets, you will see, and Sky read his book, The Great Revolution already happened. Persons need to take and examine those things, open it up, do a forensic study of the revolution, and see that the minority wanted their interest to be served, but the majority interest was the one that had to be put together and work on. So that is my thing here for that. And if anybody has anything else to say, Ken probably
John,
I could probably.
John, it seemed as though, what happened? It seemed as though burgers have been frozen forever. But
I'll probably stop share and then stop sharing and then go back into the regular Zoom meeting. And we have to do that.
Yeah.
And
we're back in the Zoom meeting now.
Yeah.
John, just before we go on, I wanted to just make a point. One of the things when we look at the revolution, we have to look at the revolution like one battle in the war to form a nation. You had a people, as Roberts has started talking about, coming from slavery. The economy changed on them in the 60s. So you were an agricultural-based economy, and all of a sudden, services started to come in. And what happened with services is that generally when you make those changes, you sometimes need less people. So you end up with unemployment of 49%. You understand? So to have a nation trying to be born amidst all of this, and it's like a baby being born in violence. And it's not unique to Grenada. Many other countries have gone through same. So you had 73, all of them, the violence then, and then you have on the heels of that, the revolution. So you've got to see this in the context of a nation being born and being changed. And as Akima aptly said, this is a philosophy, it's something that has to go forward. And forget about the ideological leanings of the party or whether you're agreeing. It's about really a nation trying to assert itself and trying to find ways to feed its 110,000 people. And of course, many of the Caribbean islands are going to, and if you look at us now, you look at a country that's importing $800 million worth of food every year. I mean, how do you survive that with a balance of payments of 44 million? So it's a lot of things we have to look at.
Yeah, I agree with that because a lot of times we look at the minute thing, look at things that instead of looking at the sunshine coming through the window, look at the speck of dust on the window and criticize the dust in the window. I think the revolution has bring more sunshine into the life of our people. And I think it is unfair to label it as a failure. And the reason why it failed. One must take an in-depth look. I think people looking from the outside haven't visited the theater of operation of the revolution. So they're looking at the band-aids, bandit on the other side of the room and thinking, well, you know what, that person really bad. They injured very bad, but they don't understand the cure, the operation that was taking place and that has taken place within in the surgery. I'm trying to make it better and to be healed. And I think Grenada was a process of healing itself and reading itself of colonialism, imperialism, and slavery mentality, and trying to develop a new mindset in its people whereby they can make positive contribution. And if you want to look around today, you will see the evidence of a people that have been transformed by the renewing of the minds in major institutions in Grenada, abroad. I look at the National Students Council, of which I myself and you, Ken, Burgers, Dessa, Wendy Crawford, Nelson. Look at those. We are products of the revolution. And when one look at Ken Whiteman and all the other people who holds key role in government and in the other institutions in Grenada, you will see that most of them are revolutionary. Look at King Council today. You know, you could look back and see fruits of all the doctors and nurses, emphasizing doctors that came back from Cuba, right? And one thing that often happens when people get a gift and they have no idea how to use it, they become dysfunctional. And I think a lot of times our people miss the big picture of what was really accomplished, what could have been done if the ocean was functioning today in its entirety. And I think there is an element of it that needs to be addressed, the functionality of the ocean after the revolution.
John, could I come in here?
Sure.
Yeah, one of the things I want to agree with Akima in the sense that I understood it like that the revolution never was dead. It just came to a halt. The difficulty is that is the behavior of some of the former actors who then went and collude subsequently and still with those people who have invaded Grenada and have confused others. I think this is something we, in terms of examining, and also I like what Dr. Jules said in that we need to study this thing in 8 areas because it would shed light. But I also want to point out.
You know that, you've been off, right?
Are you hearing me?
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Yeah. Okay. I also want to say that one of the solid state or a sad state that we have faced coming out of that energy coming from 79 to 83 is that whereas Maurice Bishop was quoted as saying in Lloyd Jones' anthology of poems, Maurice Bishop was quoted, he's a Black African American. He quoted Maurice Bishop as saying that reading and studying a constant habit of a conscious people. I don't see that among our people. And we pride ourselves that we are not a reading people. That's why we could mix up the playing of the anthem between the Chinese and the Taiwanese. So that's one of the reasons. So you have a situation in Grenada today where we don't even have a public library for more than 10 years now. I mean, it says something about the character of our people. And I think we need to address some of these issues. So while the revolution certainly have not ceased, and it's probably finding different layers like water, there's on the surface, there's a lot we need to regress about. I mean, we need to feel sad about because even the extent of denial and confusing people with different things. For instance, we had a Truth and Reconciliation, what they call it, commission. And what have come out of that? Nobody talks about that because it was very an exercise in futility and also of, politicking. So one of the things I would suggest that we have to become radically honest, which we are not. Radically honest and see life, and also the contribution of Jane, our nurse, is very interested we have to become broad in our outlook. And if we become broad, and also we need to begin to know, we still deny our Africanness in this day and age. Look at how many of the people who bleaching them skin. We have to ask ourselves, did we have revolution? And if we had revolution, why it is? Ken talk about the $800 or so million of import of food. I was told by an official who has since died from the Ministry of Education that, no, by somebody from the Ministry of Education, and I was telling her education, somebody from the Ministry of Agriculture told me that, and I told a person from the Ministry of Education that, and he supported this, which I thought was even strange and crazy, that folks came from the Department of Agriculture and Commerce from the United States and told the guys in Ministry of Education, of Agriculture, forget this thing about you trying to feed yourself. You could import things much cheaper and in larger quantity. And it seems that this is what we have done. And all the other things, dismantling organization, intimidating people, dividing the society, I think we have done that. And many people have remained silent, going about their business on their own. And I think what have been lacking since the revolution is that need for solidarity by those who continue to continue to struggle, that those who continue to shed light. And some people here know what I'm talking about. But we need to become, first of all, we need to become radically honest. And one of the demonstrations that would convince me is that we would become a reading and studious people we are not. Other people instruct us all the time. Look, when we voted in favor of South Africa at the UN, all the nonsense, why Mandela didn't come here. I mean, all those things, these are things we have to feel bad, feel regrettable about. Of course, we can't dwell on it, but we have to admit that there have been negative, elements in our subsequently to what we were trying to do. I'll stop here.
So yes, brother, point well taken. And like you said, there are a lot of people probably who know and who could have and still is part and parcel of the development process in Grenada and outside of Grenada. We could look at all of aspects.
Someone's on Zoom. Are you hearing me?
Yeah. Yes. We hear
Give
you.
me a thumbs up. Somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yes,
So
Bernard,
comrades, the official broadcast on television, WPG-10 in Grenada is over. That program is over. So we are going to migrate our discussion. We're going to have an open discussion on Grenada at 50 and the revolution at 45 and moving into the future. The whole question of reconciling the past and shaping the future. We're going to have an open discussion on this topic going forward. We have, colleagues, if you're not too busy, we have another hour or so together. Again, thank you so much.
Bernard, I just wanted to respond to something that
some of you guys have been posting your questions. I think I have another question here. I think I asked most of the questions I had before. Ruggles, that was I like the answer that you gave. Is not towards that last question. It's not that we're making excuses and so on, but yes. I like the segue. But the reality is that I believe some immaturity by some of, I would say not some of the top leaders, but some of the second tier leaders. In fact, some of them took matters in their own hand and arrested people, and some of those people got lost in the system. So I heard what you said, but I think there was also some wayward people who helped cause some of that problems with some of the freedoms that were curtailed among some of our people in the past.
Bernard, before you joined, there was a contribution from Joseph.
So let's see if we can get some more questions coming in, colleagues.
Bernard,
I don't know if you're hearing. There was a contribution because I think you joined the meeting when the meeting was already going on.
Someone is asking a question
I think he's hearing you.
I don't think he's hearing.
Why is
Bernard,
why
you're
is
not
Bernard,
hearing.
and I think they're
No.
talking about Bernard Code here. Why is he not credited for the role he played in organizing the structures of the revolution, especially the actually making of the revolution? I don't know if you on the panelists want.
I think we have an issue, board. Just mute your mic a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have an issue. We have two different meetings.
Yes.
I don't know if we have two different platforms. You need to sign out and come back because
come back on Zoom.
Yeah. Come back on Zoom, comrade.
Okay. I just wanted to point out to something that Joseph Antoine mentioned, you know, why because revolution happened and so on, but basically we in the same place. Our economy is in the same way.
Colleagues, good night.
I think he's not hearing us.
Okay, so are you all right?
Bernard, are you hearing us?
I'm hearing you loud and clear. Are you hearing me?
Okay. Yes, I'm hearing you.
All right,
I
so
don't
let
think
me
you're
ask.
hearing
Yeah, let me ask. Did you hear? Did you hear on Zoom? Did you hear the answer Ruggles give towards the end of our official broadcast? Did anybody hear? Did you hear that answer?
No.
Okay, all right. So let's get back to that point. Ruggles,
Bernard, you're not hearing Ken. Ken was addressing that very concern.
We addressed that. We addressed that. Jem had talked about the issue with Bernard and why he should be recognized. And then Joseph Antoine had gone into the issue of where our economy is. So I was just making a quick response to that.
Okay. So, but before that, I was asking, yeah, we'll get to that, Ken, in a second, but because Ruggles, there was an important question posed towards the end of the official presentation. I think Ruggles gave a brilliant answer, in my opinion, but I don't know if you heard Ruggles' answer, those of you who are on the Zoom program, on the Zoom platform.
No, we didn't hear it.
Okay, so Ruggles, let me ask the
it.
question one more time so Ruggles could at least take a hit at it and we'll come to the question that Ken was answering. Is that okay, colleagues? So the question was, this is from one of the viewers on Zoom, I believe. One of the fundamental problems of the revolution was not keeping its promises. For example, the Grenadian people were fed up with Gary's attacks on freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to print newspapers, and so on and so forth. Freedom for us to gather as youth and students and so on. However, the PRG, upon taking office, became harsher on some of these areas of freedom, example, freedom of the press and freedom of opinions and so on. To what extent would you say that because the revolution failed to keep its promises, it contributed to the downfall, to the collapse of the revolution in its last days? And Ruggles had a comment, so Ruggles, I'll invite you to make your comment, and then we're going to hear other colleagues.
Okay, thank you. I will try to remember the essence of my comment, but I was saying, I made the point earlier that the revolution has to be seen within a particular context. So, for example, the revolution is lauded for several achievements. And then the issue comes up, well, what's about detainees? What's about individual rights and freedoms? In fact, the negative associated with the revolution, apart from October 83, precisely dealt with detainees. No. The reality was, well, that it was a revolution. It was a revolution. And one of the criticisms to is the Constitution. In fact, that the revolution suspended the Constitution on March 12, 1979. So there was no Constitution, and the PRG assumed what we refer to as executive and legal authority. Now, I was making the point in the context of our history. One, history as a people, we have come from slavery, in which we had absolutely no rights. Slave had no rights. There were commodities bought and sold like everybody else. Then we were a colony of the United Kingdom from 1783 throughout, predominantly British influence. So everything was done for us. Even with independence, we got a constitution from them. And many of you here would hear Citizen Rollo about this constitution invalid because it was not passed by our people, wasn't involved, our parliament was not involved, because our constitution, in fact, 50 years later, and a constitution is the supreme law, is the basic law, 50 years later, remains what was given to us in 1974 as an order in council from the British monarch. Now that's your basic law, your supreme law. So, and I make that point in the context of the revolution being judged on a Westminster system. Listen, you all promise elections, but no elections. Now, and I say I firmly believe that the intention was eventually to have elections. But the PRG made it clear in the leadership speeches and Morris speeches that we don't believe in this 5-second democracy where people, their rights are exercised for 5 seconds every 5 years. When they go to a ballot box, they vote, and they have no involvement at all, any significant involvement as to what takes place between that time and the next election. And the PRG believed in a system of genuine people's participation through the mass organizations, the zonal and parish councils. So, for example, I asked the question, if you were going to have an election, is on the basis of what constitution? You must have an election based on a constitution. Is it that you're saying the PRG should have gone back to the Westminster system and hold elections under the Westminster system when they made clear that we are moving away from that? And what is not spoken about at all is that in 1983, in June 1983, the PRG set up a constitutional commission headed by Alan Alexander, a senior counsel from Trinidad and Tobago, to begin the process of a new constitution. Now, the revolution was basically in transition, right? Enjoyed wide support and everything, and in transition. And therefore, the focus was on consolidating the revolution. The issue of detainees, yes, there were detainees, as there are detainees in every single revolution all over the world, because the revolution is preserving and protecting itself, and that is not in defense of detainees, but that's part of the reality. In the first year of the American Revolution, there were over 100,000 detainees. Over that period, how many hundreds of thousands of detainees? That is part of our history. The slave had no rights. The slaves who were brought from Africa, they had no rights at all. So when we talk in history and we're looking at things in their it has to be in particular context. And therefore, the revolution continued to enjoy the wide support up to its demise. And that, of course, is another issue. But part of the problem then is that the party and the state did not have the structures in place to deal with what arose in 1983. That's part of the reality. There was no constitution existing at the time. The party, in fact, to the best of my knowledge, did not have a constitution. And I'm not saying if there was a constitution, it may have gone differently. But a constitution is fundamental to a country. And it is significant that 50 years after, the Constitution and independence the same age and will always be the same age. And 50 years after, we still have the same British Constitution handed to us in 1974. So I'm saying all of this to say simply that one can't, and whilst it's important to point out weaknesses and criticisms, that one cannot just say, listen, write off the PRG, as many would like to do, because simply there were no elections. There were no elections, but people were more involved than they ever were pre the revolution and post when they had a constitution. In fact, people are not even familiar with the Grenada Constitution, as we have seen. So I just make these basic points because these are points we hardly discuss. So anytime you talk revolution, there are certain people in society, the first thing they want is detainees. You know, they pick up, you jail them, right? What's about that? In every revolution, it happens. And that is why it is important to build institutions in society that would protect against abuse. So you don't have a situation where you'll have to go to armed revolution to overthrow a government, because you have sufficiently strong institutions in society that will be able to stand up to that abuse.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that, Ruggles. Any of the panelists want to chime in? Ken, for example, you were wrong in those days. Anybody, you wish to chime in?
Before we go,
I think Ruggles did a really good job. I just want to say though that I think we have to look back at the revolution as history. And as any process, there are going to be errors and there are going to be successes. And so I think there are some things that a revolution could have done differently. I think the amount of detainees, even with the attacks, and Ruggles is right, there were actual violent plots that were stopped, you know? But I still think that one of the things the revolution should have been a lot more conscious of is the amount of people that were held without trial. I think it's something that when you look back and people talk about it, that's one of the lasting elements that I think should have been mitigated a bit.
If I could come in here, come with Bones.
Yes, go ahead, John.
Jane has a hand up. And sometimes when we look back now, we think, well, we had too much detainees. But if you look back and you go to the question, and as I have done after the revolution, I've met several persons who were detained, right? And I heard it on one of my shows, one guy called in and said that he was being recruited by Dr. Japal and other persons, James Harry and so on, right? So there's a lot of people surrounding those elements that was engaged, right, in activities. And so the comrades then was involved in the process of destabilization. So you can't just say, well, I can't pick up Bob because Bob is not the head of it. But Bob could have been an instrument by which was used to become destructive. So despite the fact that we had a lot of detainees, yes, but I say, well, they had too much and you just arrest people arbitrarily. Yes, a lot of people got arrested, but the association and the questioning and the filtering of who is who, you can't leave everybody on the street if I'm from that circle. And that might be a bad thing to do. It might have been the right thing to do then, looking back in retrospect now, saying, well, you had too many things, you know. Or which one of them you'd have let loose? I mean, look at my neighbor who put the bomb in the park. Two of them, my neighbors, right? I mean, who would have think they would have engaged in that? My neighbor just two doors up the street from me. Two beautiful young ladies, right? So let us.
Oh.
All right, John, thank you so much for that. Anybody else wanted to chime in on that?
Let me just maybe offer a different approach to this
I think
question.
I get cut off. Sorry.
Jane, go ahead, please.
All right. Well, we'll hand it back when he comes back on. 3 keywords: history, radical honesty, and maybe accountability. So I loved history, and one of the ways or pathways I came to learn more about the revolution, other than growing up with the stories in my household, was actually asking the question as a 17-year-old, if the revolution was so successful and there was so much mass mobilization, how could it fail? What were the factors that made it fail? And I wrote a history essay on that. And within that, I looked at levels, partially a political angle, partially a legal angle, partially a geopolitical angle, which have already been pointed out by Ruggles and also by Ken, and I think they have all merit in their ballot. But then there's something actually possibly a bit more simple. I'm very interested in psychology, so I looked at it from a also more socio-psychological perspective. And from a detached vision, detached view, because I wasn't there, I wasn't enmeshed